Welcome to Pop Chat. My name is Annette Tarpley, and I'm the host. And I'm very delighted to have with me this evening Michelle Nicholson from New Orleans, Louisiana. Welcome, Michelle. It's great to
Thank
have you.
you. Thank you for having me, Annette.
It's great to have you. I'm thrilled. We're a little late, some technical difficulties, and then we were just like chatting ahead of time. So sorry. We're getting to know each other a little bit. So sorry that we're a little late, but so glad that you all joined us. So, Michelle, what I'm going to do is I want to give the stage to you instead of like reading a bio. I want you to tell us about you because mine would be very monotone and, not so good. And just divulge whatever information you want us to know about Michelle, Michelle the person, Michelle the writer, and tell us a little bit about you. So, I'm going to give the stage to you, Michelle.
Okay, thanks, Annette. I am a local New Orleanian. My family has been living in New Orleans for hundreds of years now. I'm a mother and a teacher. I am a co-founder of Liminal Arts, which is a New Orleans-based arts administration program. We organize local readings and book launches, festivals, and workshops. I actually was holding a workshop and a staged reading of a one-act play earlier today with Judy Class, who is based in Vanderbilt. So yeah, I started writing poetry when I was in elementary school, and I've been involved in the arts, really theater and local performance and film for many, many years. But I left teaching and went back to grad school in 2017 and finished with my MFA in 2022. So my book that is coming out this June is my thesis from finishing my graduate program at the University of New Orleans.
Great. That's exciting, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
congratulations for that. That's wonderful. So you really have a wealth of knowledge, and especially in literature, you said you have been writing since you were small, and so I'm sure that you've seen over the years a growth or a change in your style of writing, or maybe the depth of your writing as the years have passed.
Well, I think that maybe what might be funny is that I would say that my original love for poetry came from my Mother Goose Book of Rhymes collection in the World Book Encyclopedia, and that is essentially I spent my childhood with those volumes of the encyclopedia and my copy of the nursery rhymes, which I just basically knew by rote by the time I was 4 or 5 years old, and in a deep storytelling culture too here in New Orleans, which is still very much an oral culture. And so having that and I say that I started in dance. My mother had me on the stage at 2 years old, and so the music is like really embedded into the poetry. But for many years I sort of I sort of leaned away from it. I always imagined myself being maybe a journalist, always considered teaching. And it wasn't until I got to high school and encountered Emily Dickinson and T.S. Eliot that I really sort of fell in love with poetry again, and started to think about it in more complex ways. But for many years, stayed away from and deliberately sort of pressed back against having a lot of sort of rhyme and a lot of music in the poetry, and that is something that has definitely resurfaced a lot in the past 5 years for me, and going back to the program and sort of reintegrating all sort of like the things that we've inherited, but also having the music and also having some form to work with. Like we were talking about earlier, I was like, oh, I was writing our poem for today and it just so happened to be a sonnet, which is something that 20 years ago I probably would have deliberately broken up the poem and made sure that it wasn't a sonnet. now I'm very interested in working with fixed forms in ways that I wasn't before. And my students that I work with actually are very interested in fixed form, believe it or not.
Wow, wow. Um, would you say that you are more of a rhymer than not a rhymer?
I would say that the meter and the tendency towards internal rhyme or sort of interlocked rhymes, as opposed to a strict pattern of end rhymes,
Yeah,
is definitely a pretty consistent trait in most of my poetry.
yeah. I've mostly been, kind of rhyming throughout most of my poetry, but there's sometimes I deviate from that, and it's some of those pieces actually that I like sometimes the best. But it's hard to get the rhymer out of me, and certain poems I think lend to it, but I kind of start thinking in rhymes right away, and then if I want to deviate from that, I kind of have to mentally think, okay, this isn't going to rhyme, so I need to just to kind of do you think it's harder to rhyme or not to rhyme?
I, you know, I would say that really it might even depend upon the content of the writing, because I do a lot of critical writing and academic writing in which I'm using a different part of my brain that perhaps is not activating the limbic system, sort of the emotional center in such a way that we have this sort of movement, this sort of expressive element that you would find in the poetry that's more musical. And so yeah, I would say, I have other work that maybe leans more into a prose or an expository form. But I think it really probably depends on like what part of the brain is being used and what it is that's being thought about and how.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that we can kind of use those different parts of the brain and kind of deviate sometimes from our norm and explore other, possible styles. I think that's kind of a cool thing. So speaking of that, what I do, I offer for poets, usually when they're coming on here, is that they come up with a title and that we both then write on the title because sometimes it's very interesting to see either similarities or differences in which way we took that title. And the title that you came up with was
May.
May. And would you mind presenting that now?
Oh, sure, sure. Let me pull it up.
I'm actually anxious to hear it, especially since you said it was a sonnet. That's wonderful. So I'm going to give the stage to you again, my dear.
Okay. May. We walk blocks out of our way to drift past a particular corner lot. White on white monochrome mailbox, side porch, house to cascade of sweet woodruff on the cobble, the faintest hint of blush peeking from clusters of alabaster English rose, heavy, draping over the picket fence, the sweetest blossom I've known. What we discovered this May while mapping artwork for our underground tour. Famous names on display in family galleries, curated spaces behind uncurtained windows. What illuminates our path, our evening constitutionals in uptown New Orleans. Chagall, Dali, Matisse, Sweet Olive shouldering the banquette, that orange tabby cat, Chopin, who strides alongside for a chat when we hit her block of laurel, what we count on, what we've measured, how close the distant image to the heart, how familiar upon the tongue the invisible bud, ready to recall for us where we're from.
Wow, that was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. I loved it. And yeah, kudos. Now I know why you teach it because you can do it. So there you go. You're so I come sometimes, especially if someone is recommended to me. I like the element of surprise. So I don't usually delve into trying to look them up or trying to look up their body of work because I love that element of surprise, that wow factor. And that certainly was. It's just beautiful. And
Thank
yeah, so I took this a different way. I was thinking May the month, I was
you.
thinking May the year. And I'm not really fond of May yet because it still seems like it's cold, too cold around here, too cold and rainy. April showers bring May flowers. I'm with the flowers. I don't want the rain and the cold. So I kind of had an attitude about the month, so I didn't go month May. I went the word May. So I thought, I know, I'm dissing May this year. I'm just like, okay, where are you, spring? Um, but so I kind of pulled mine out at the last minute, and it is what it is or isn't. I'm trying to get it to where I was stupid enough not to put it on my phone where I could really see it. So I'm trying to access it on my computer, which isn't working that well. So we're going to try to do that anyway. I'll see how it goes. So it's called May. You may enter my world for a brief period of time. Once you do enter, you may choose to remain a part of my life. I, in turn, may entertain the prospect of you becoming an integral component in my continual journey. For that to occur, there's something that you may need to know about me, that I value friendship, that I require mutual respect, love, and admiration, that I openly come to you exposing myself, which may contain skeletal secrets within my closet. I may at any time feel comfortable enough to openly express myself. You may find it important to hold my laments with the utmost confidence, or you may decide to allow those loose lips to wag and share my heart's most guarded information. If I become privy to any knowledge of that delicate betrayal of confidence, I very well may to choose to sever those once binding ties, forfeiting a mutual friendship now devoid of value and worth. Still, yet a pupil in the study of the art of forgiveness, I may ponder that derisive possibility, or I may reject the preponderance of toxicity, perhaps choosing an unburdened path to happiness. I just may. That's it.
That was gorgeous.
There was lots of mays in there. There's all kinds of
I
mays.
know. I get, and it really resonated with me while I was thinking about the prompt. I very much had sort of the undercurrent, the thread was the idea of possibility, or and the idea of openness. And sort of like one of the ideas that I had, it's sort of circling around, and I haven't made anything of it yet, but the idea of like how May spills all of April's secrets, that there's like all of this rain and it's just like being absorbed in the underground. And then May is just like sort of open and spilling open, with
I
all of
love
these.
that. I love that. Yeah, May's kind of the aftermath of April, isn't it?
It is.
Kind of
And
like
April is the cruelest month.
it
As
just
it
kind of teases
traditionally,
you a little bit. It teases you. It's like, I still want to be winter. I want to be spring, and just kind of back and forth. And so, yeah, I'm just so tired of it. It's going to go from like cold to hot. That's what it's going to be like. It usually is.
I was enjoying the fire in the background, though. We don't. It's a relatively seasonless land here in New Orleans, and it pretty much is exactly it. It is hot all the time with an occasional cold snap. Cover up the fruit trees and bust out the sweaters for 3 days.
Wow. So most of the time it's just very mild and warm. And you have the Mississippi River there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I have swam in that river, although not in Louisiana.
I would not. I would not. No one swims in it here. That is.
Well, that was when I was young and stupid, and they took us to these beaches in Guttenberg, Iowa. and I just remember the water looking really dirty all the time. But we'd go in there and we'd find shells and stuff, and it was fun when I was younger and naive. But yeah, I don't think I'd swim in
The
the
river
Mississippi
here is
now.
something to behold.
What'd
The
you say?
river here is the river here is something to behold, and it certainly impacts um, our lives in the most obvious and subtle ways.
That that is a poem in itself. And it's interesting actually because the pop chat that I have later in a couple of hours, I have one again in a couple of hours with the Roanoke's first youth poet laureate, which I met at an event the other day. And I said, "You need to come on my pop chat," and so she's graciously agreed. But the poem that she came up with, something like "Where the River Flows" or "Rivers Flow" or something like that. So, but yeah, it just can be so impactful, the rivers, because it can be a good thing. And then there's times where it can be treacherous and wreak havoc. Yeah. So, you probably get catfish from that river though, don't you?
Well, I mean, not we'll get catfish maybe from like Pontchartrain, but mostly from the bayou here. Um, but of
Do they
course,
do the noodling with the hands? Noodling?
no, you know, we have the Isleños community in eastern St. Bernard Parish, which is southeast of New Orleans. It used to be the city of New Orleans. It's where all of the food was originally sourced from for the city. There were farms down there, as well as fishermen and shrimpers and trappers. And so a lot of our seafood is still coming from that part, just south of us along the Mississippi. But the Mississippi River here, and we're going to maybe start to get into ecopoetics. The Mississippi River here is all industrialized. We are living in Cancer Valley. And so the river is lined pretty much from the Mississippi line down with chemical plants. Um, so all of the fishing is happening
Yeah.
in more of the marshes in the Gulf of Mexico, south of the
So
city.
does that waste dump into the Mississippi then?
Absolutely. There's a 20 square mile dead zone at the foot of the river. And it's actually, you would think that it's from pesticides. It's actually mostly because of agriculture runoff from fertilizer. That yeah, it's a balance, and so the bacteria overpopulate and end up eutrophying the
Yeah.
water. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny in looking at my book, in working with the woman who's working on the cover. Yeah, I said there's water in almost every poem, in almost every poem. But I certainly do have a piece that nods towards um, that reality. Maybe even a couple of pieces that nods towards that
We're
can
going to
tell.
get right to those pieces. I'm just very excited. We have a couple of viewers, two or three people. So recently, I just want to make mention because this is the first time I've had a pop chat where it is no longer connected to Facebook. And Facebook recently has quit allowing third parties to stream through them. So it used to be very nice. I used to stream both YouTube and Facebook at the same time. I'd go into StreamYard and set it all up, and it just automatically post, automatically happen. And recently, Facebook stopped doing that. So and people used to actually um, communicate through Facebook to us. Now, one thing that happened through Facebook was that we didn't usually know unless they changed the settings who the comments was from. It would just show up as a Facebook user. Then later on, when you read it, you could tell. But this is for the first time live just on YouTube. And we do have a comment from Carl. Carl is a friend of mine who is a musician and an artist. Hey, Carl. And one of these days, I'm going to have him on here. So he's written music. Love it, he says, and that actually shows who it is. So thanks for the comment. And for anyone else, you can comment apparently on YouTube. So that's good to know. I was afraid perhaps we couldn't receive any comments. But thanks for joining us, Carl. And So, what I would really love to do is to delve more into Michelle's poetry and would like for you to share two or three pieces, whatever you choose to share with us. And then we can come back and chat after we listen a little bit more to your work. Um, so, I will give you the stage again. Are you prepared to do
Well,
so?
I mean, I have poems. I had not necessarily thought about or prepared what I might read.
That's
But
it.
I guess I can go ahead and launch to one of the poems in particular, um, which is it's towards the opening of the second section of the collection, which is divided into four parts with an epilogue, which is sort of a broken up villanelle. Um, so, perhaps I might read the three pieces opening up the second section of the book. And the third piece would be the poem in particular I was thinking about that sort of nods towards the situation with our river. Um, the first piece is a sort of invocation. It's dedicated, so I should maybe say that most of the poems in the collection are dedicated to members of my family, members of our community here who are associated with, inspired the poem, and so the first poem is dedicated to Antoinette Ryu, who I carry her name Antoinette as well. Her grandparents were running the apothecary here in 1811. She was born in 1817, and so the first poem is dedicated to her as a sort of invocation. The second poem is the Ballad of Double D, which I had the honor of being selected for an Academy of American Poets award for. And then the third poem is a birthday poem, which is dedicated to one of my best friends. Okay. In darkness, the harbor. Rate what has fallen, rise with the river each spring, where knees reach skyward in supplication to the black sky, star punctuated, perforated darkness behind the curtain of light at the bend in the river. As a miracle is simple, as a shoulder at your side, a full cup in hand, and plenty is a memory of having neither want nor need, only joy as the water climbs the levee and our mother's seeds call for planting to sprawl like cats sprouting from the apothecary door. The Ballad of Double D. When Double D returned the first time, he arrived at our Christmas party a brand new man, an incarnation shiny as the 6-inch buckle twanging below his banded Stetson. His boots, too, were made of skin and curved faintly toward the popcorn ceiling. The fool he was in Ruston, trading in his training in controlled flight, pilot lessons for trailer life, coupon clipping, square cubes floating on 4 fingers of bourbon. His lover had given him a real fancy accent. And yeah, you bet she sure could cook good. Oven biscuit, barbecue, no box macaroni, fresh corn on the cob. All that butter his mama wouldn't let him eat straight from the tub. But her baby wasn't his, and country was never suited for jazzy sax, electric guitar, his first love, native tongue, the home that followed him on the road, leather repelling the open heavens, rubber gripping hot to the highway, to show hipsters in St. Louis how he'd play their instruments if he were them. Had to trade it all in, exactly like the van that broke down on that last trip, because maybe the condom broke and maybe it didn't, but the Mandeville rich still practice shotgun weddings, even if the man is of such low stock he's never seen a blanket ladder. After all, working class work, so he worked for her. Credit cards and indentured servitude for a mortgage her father paid. He toiled. He teetered for a decade. She got 4 degrees, 4 kids, alimony. He got time. He got free. He also got a TikTok account, a room at his parents' place in Picayune, and a 12 gauge ear piercing, a silver hoop. This time he showed up on my front porch, Black Friday, with a steel stringed acoustic, soul patch, and a bottle of peanut butter whiskey. We were playing Uno like our elders once did, circled around the dining room table, smoking bud instead of tobacco, when he gave thanks for enduring the incident, the kind our Uncle Harry and cousin Leslie didn't. I asked him what made him, standing at the lake's edge, decide not to do it. He said I didn't. The safety, inexplicably, was on. He took that as a sign saying he was mistaken, he was alive, he could still go home. I told him I agreed. How I knew. How the dream life becomes dream walking. How we rise, eyes open. How we rise, breathing water. Birthday poem. In high school, we celebrated our springtime birthdays with cake and frozen daiquiris, barbecues and crawfish boils. In college, we added St. Patty's Day parades, chasing shots of Jameson with Mick Ultras, sucking heads and catching heads of cabbage hurled from floats rolling down Annunciation Street. For this birthday, for a change, we meet halfway for a dinner of surf and turf. A bottle of spirits moors in your throat, anchoring you with a generous berth as you silently crest and sink, watching the shoreline of the route we've mapped, the docks where we have loaded and unloaded again. We travel between these river repasts, each following our opposing banks, the sun and moon rising and sinking through zeniths and horizons, but rarely over our heads, before or behind us. Our future may be past, the dead zone of the river's mouth, an eventual path, maybe sticking to the coast, ducking into bays with familiar names to share a plate of fried potatoes. Maybe searching for the remote island beaches you favor, drifting over black fathoms, fishing far into the open Gulf.
Beautiful. I can't snap my fingers too good, so I'll just do the motions. It was, I loved it. So Double D is a real
Mm-hmm.
person, real person.
Yeah, yeah. No, I pretty much everything that I write is hybrid. Um, in the first, this collection is very much grounded in, it's sort of chronological and starts with my childhood, and it's sort of a winter. It's seasonal as well. So it starts off with winter in my childhood, in the St. Claude and the St. Roch neighborhoods of New Orleans, and goes into my early girlhood, and then sort of travels abroad in the third section, which has some ekphrastic writing, and some sort of dialogics, some sort of myth writing, rewriting. There's a whole section in conversation with Ariadne and Hippolyta and Theseus. And then the final section is a return to the city.
So is it somewhat biographical?
Oh, absolutely,
Oh,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
I tend to write.
everything
I
that I
tend to
write
write
is
a lot of
real.
fiction. I do a lot of fiction. I do storytelling.
Well,
Um,
I grew up though with sort of again in this oral culture, and so I grew up with storytelling, with this idea of sort of receiving, being a receiver of these stories, but also a creator of these stories. And when I tell you, like, this is not an exaggeration at all. When I was maybe 18 months old, my mother bought me a collection. I had a collection of, those hard cardboard books, but they were picture books and they were picture narratives, and she had me telling her stories from these picture books at maybe 18 months old. And
wow.
so the also, the relationship between observing and, and of course there's this deep history, sort of like the idea of being the flaneur in the city, sort of moving about, the silent observer, the witness, the writer, the artist as a witness. Um, when I was in elementary school, I was, a historian for the 4-H club. So I was taking pictures and I was writing, articles to go along with the pictures. And so I did, I guess for me, it's difficult to separate the compulsion to be a writer from from being so steeped in my awareness of being a vehicle um, for this culture that I'm a part of, that I'm so privileged to be a part of in New Orleans.
So you
Uh,
have always
have
had this
such a
gift.
dynamic creative scene because of it. Truly, truly, truly.
You've always had this gift of
Well,
words, of words of storytelling. I mean, from birth, you just been there.
inheritance, an inheritance. Yeah. I have a poem. It's called "The Art of Learning Regifting." Um, that is totally relevant. Yeah, and it's
So does someone else in your family write as well then?
I'm well. My sister's a lawyer. That's a kind of writing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It is. It is.
Not always
Um,
the kind of writing I personally understand, but
my daughter, I would venture to say that my daughter has a job in communications, and very much what she does is a combination of both writing as well as creating visuals. She went to her undergraduate program for both art history and design, but she has a background in fine arts. It's really where she started, and so I would say that and my son is very rhetorical. My son writes poetry, but my son's very rhetorical in his tendencies as well. So, but again, it's coming from an oral culture. My grandfather, my grandmother to some extent as well, was my grandfather who really was the carrier of the tradition. And he would not have, having only gone through the 4th grade, it's not something that he's written down.
right.
Um, but that's something that I have sort of received and sort of repackaged. Okay, let me just, can I read you this poem? It is also from the beginning, and it's so much in conversation with like what we're talking about right now, in the sense that the poetry is sort of a way of taking those stories and repackaging them in a way that it's a gift for someone else.
Yeah, I would never have guessed that you had children that old. I thought you
Oh
were.
yeah, my daughter is 27, and my son, my Katrina baby, and I have two poems for them that maybe I might be able to share as well. Um, he's 18. He's 18, and so my daughter
You
is
were
is in
12 when
design.
I'm sure you were 12 when you had your daughter, right?
No.
I used to say that I was 12 when,
No, no, no. I am
but
past.
you look very good. So you're very well preserved. So yes, my daughter will be 40 this year. I was 12 when I had her.
Oh, I would have never guessed that. I would have never guessed that either. Well, but we were talking about that when, you just have such gorgeous skin. Absolutely. So, yeah, let me pull out
Sorry,
gift.
I'm always like choking on my spit in here. I'm not sure why. Apparently, I don't know how to control my saliva. Um, there should be a poem about that. Carl,
Oh,
who's on here, commented earlier. We're always talking, and he'll always say, "That's a poem," or "That's a poem," you know. And we went out the other day, and there's this kid outside. He was, I say kid, he's probably in his 20s. I said, "You look like a poet." He said, "I have written poetry." And Carl's like, "How did you know that he was a poet?" And it was like, I don't know, just look like a poet, just, you know. Can you look at somebody sometimes and see that they're artistic, whether they're an artist or a poet or
I mean, I think that that's so hard. I live in a community where the assumption is that the person is involved in the arts in some way, shape, or form, or at least within the circles that I have exposure to. Um, but creative people are creative in all of their ways, and so I think that it's easy to sort of notice um, a person who's infusing, creative, and by that I mean divergent thought
right.
in of existing in and sort of their own being true to their own identities too. But that's like a whole sidebar conversation. Um, yeah, like I think that you can tell a little bit, but some creatives are in disguise.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes I just have an inkling. So one of the questions I always ask everyone, do you know what this is? I don't know if you watched a full pop chat, but is tomorrow you run across Aladdin's lamp and you can be bestowed three wishes, whatever you wish in the whole wide world. It doesn't matter what it is. You can have whatever wishes you want. What are your three wishes going to be?
Mm. I have read The Monkey's Paw way too much to have ever considered this in my life. Um, so I think my first wish would have to be for there to be like no surprise, harmful, or destructive consequences for any of my wishes. Like, can I have like is there some sort of loop? I don't, I need to consult my lawyer sister to find out exactly how to word the first wish.
Yeah,
So no
there's
guarantee.
some people that always say their third wish is that they ask for three more wishes. So, you know, um, I, you know,
I just live in such a space of constant gratitude. You know, and I do as part of like sort of my annual ritual, sort of ask or invite for certain kinds of abundances into my life. But really, really, all I would wish for is to continue to have the challenge and the privilege to live a life um, of meaning and value, um, and to to find peace and and to just have peace with what it is that I am able to take from the day or to make from the day really.
I think that is a perfect answer. I mean, I totally respect that 100%. So, and I think that
I
the
tell you what, I'm looking for an apartment with a sweet garden space outside for a
okay,
really
you do what
nice
that is that your selfish is that your selfish wish? Is that your selfish wish? I want a sweet garden outside. No, that's good. You can wish for that. No, but that was actually a perfect response, and I think it's a very humbling, and it shows me a lot about you and that you've developed as a human being into someone who's very introspective and can really look back at their life and value what needs to be valued in life. So that's actually just a perfect answer. So kudos to you, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so grateful to be here with you today, Annette. It's so, and we've had this great conversation. And it's just the start of a conversation. Um,
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful thing, and I've met so many wonderful people like you, and just respect, so many people that I've met through this means. It's actually an honor and privilege to me. Um, I think that we all want in life to have purpose and value, and that's pretty much what you alluded to, and you certainly do, and you probably have blessed many people with your knowledge and your teaching capabilities, and I'm sure you're a wonderful teacher. You could probably teach me a thing or two, Michelle, about writing. I am sure. So, but I think that you're blessed with that. So kudos to you for that. I would love to hear more of your poetry. You had mentioned a little bit ago, it sounds like I'm sure that your children are a very important part of your life. And you had mentioned maybe, you know, reciting poems about them if that's what you want to do, or whatever you want to do. If you want to do two or three more poems, whatever you want to do, that would be great because I'd love to hear more. You're a great writer and so blessed to have you here. And thanks to Todd Cirillo.
Yeah,
Um,
shout out to Todd. He's a
Shout
jazz
out
fest.
to Todd for
Mhm.
right. So he's who put us together. So shout out to Todd. He's been very generous with sharing his wonderful, talented friends. And you live in the same place that he does, right? So
Yeah,
you
we are both a part of our New Orleans cohort. And Annette, you're going to come visit soon. We're going to get you down here when the weather's good.
I'm
Uh,
going. You just tell me when to go, and I'll make sure it happens because I'm ready for an adventure. It'll be wonderful. So
we'll
I'm going
have
to
a
be.
retreat. You'll have a retreat. This is the beginning of the Virginia Louisiana
I'm
connection.
telling you,
And we
it
were talking
is.
about that earlier, really, supporting each other and making space and opportunities for and like celebrating each other is the number one way to keep this thing alive.
And I think that that's so important that we celebrate each other and each other's. Everybody has their own style, their own niche, and that's the great thing about writing and getting to know poets is that everybody has their own swag, and it's wonderful. It's just this discovery. Just when you think that your mind has thought of every way and every angle, somebody else comes up with something else, and they're like, "Whoa, that's." So it is such a privilege to meet people like you. And thanks again, Todd. You're the man. So thumbs up. And I'm going to give the stage back to you, dear beautiful Michelle, and you share some more with us, please.
Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll read the three poems that I sort of thought about in association with the conversation that we were having. The first one being the poem that is dedicated to my grandfather. The second one being a poem about my daughter. And then the third one being the poem for my Katrina baby, for my son. Learning the art of regifting. Grandfather wielded a right-angled ruler, 2 planks the length of my arms, pointed in multiple directions at all times, a folding wooden baton. He stored it deep in the pocket of his dickies, always at hand. He must have used it to build his workshop, walls of wooden blocks, a roof of rectangles and squares, loft stacked with rows of stained glass jars, windows high and narrow on the garage door. But I only saw him use the ruler to wrap gifts for family parties, celebrations where people ate from piles of fresh fruit and crustless finger sandwiches. I would stand at attention as he muttered incantations, marked bent paper to wrap the box in fat blossoms, a gold line smattering on a flat background. I never minded when it was his time and he sat with his gifts, turning them in his hands, inspecting the seams with his fingertips to locate the tape to cut with his pocket knife without tearing the precious wrap. He would smooth the blank interior before gently folding the paper and setting it aside until later, when he would show me how it could hold a present for someone else. Solstice ritual with my firstborn. At cricket's gift horsed, the wild woman unkempt levers loose the teeth in my ears. Mola Mojana, she shrugs, places them in your mouth. Her eyes are all antennae and leafy moth wings. She sinks her fingertips into her sternum and pries her chest apart, releasing bees and a ribbon from the cavity that was her body. Why hadn't I noticed the honeycomb above her antlered head? My hand signs thank you, and we walk our way. You wear two green stones, bezels set in skyscraper pendulums dangling like lanky pears in pirouette. The entrance is dark, but you wear a headlamp. I am breathless, but you laugh and shimmy closer. Show me the empty cup of your palm as you whisper, she made it by hand. Silver-eyed, I see you for the first time. Your body is not attached to you. Your head is not attached to your... My head is not attached. We say yes. Graduation song for my Katrina baby. Glittering eyes, sharp tongue, forked, mouthing honey greens, dark, spicy, fire builder, fire stoker, bringing forth light from ash. Boy from lavender and cedarwood, from black grapes and black cherries. Boy belting out night song karaoke, pitch perfect while we navigate cities and valleys. Boy racing through fields of wildflowers, careening down the mountain. Boy dancing in the rain. Boy knotting a plaid tie. Boy staring into the sun, shanking loose what he has learned to see. The drifting remnants of a fetal optical artery dissolved, a snow globe in the periphery of his own inner eye. What joy is there in a radish that may grow to see unblemished, unearthed from where it belongs? He is all interrogations, ethics and existentialism, the cost of freedom, taxi driver, Texas chainsaw massacre, and the Smiths. Plato in poetry, brimmed hats and leather boots, cotton shirts buttoned, cuffs rolled up, toisled coifs. My boy was only ever a small man, round head tucked neatly, nestled warm under mama's arm. Now mama tucks her shoulder under his. How we cross paths under destined stars, how a storm-torn newborn returns to map the land of his ancestors. Periplum.
Wonderful. So, as you're reciting, I'm just thinking to myself, she just has this mastery of imagery. I mean, you have a way just, I mean, the whole time my mind is going with you. And, you're seeing those images that you are creating and that you are writing and that sculpt with your pen in such a marvelous way. So kudos to you, because not everyone has that gift of imagery, and you have it to such a depth that um, you just are there with you. And so thank you for that. It's just a beautiful talent that you
Thank you for
possess.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. And what homage you paid to your loved ones too. It was fun to get those little insights of your loved ones and for you to share those lovely things with us about your loved ones as well. So, so how do your children feel about your writing?
Um, well, I think that my children are generally, my daughter is very supportive, and actually, my daughter, I've worked with her for so long as her editor that now she has essentially become my best editor, and she is, we make books together. She is one of my, she's one of one of our partners, one of our creative directors in the nonprofit. And so she's really a creative partner for me at this point. And we will co-construct, language and different projects. And like I said, we create anthologies together. My son is, my son wants me to be happy. My son what he says is that he's not going to read the book, but I think that it's like, oh, that's like too personal about mom's life. But he also writes poetry and really fantastic essays. So,
Mhm.
the way that they've engaged with it is different. But he's also very creative in terms, he works with textiles, and he started off very young making a lot of his own clothing and things like
Oh,
that.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, I mean, and I did have my children young, clearly.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, maybe he can
many
make
people
your
do.
gown when you receive your big awards when you walk the carpet and stuff later on. Maybe he can.
Well, yeah, and he and I that yeah, and he does. He's more active with the sort of performative work that I do in the community. And yeah, I mean, yeah, the kids are great. The kids are so great.
But the fact that your daughter is kind of following your footsteps somewhat really says a lot about how much she appreciated your talents. Otherwise, she wouldn't have, went down that road. So kudos to you. One thing I would really love, especially since you are an educator, is for you to define poetry. Poetry, prose. What is it? What makes poetry poetry, and what you know how would you define it?
Well, I mean, I would say that perhaps on from one point of view, poetry would be any kind of sort of more experimental form of literature that does not neatly fall into the category of, short story, novel, play. And so I do think that especially since the formal movement, since the 20th century, I say that really since the expressive movement, the romantic movement, 19th century, there's been a lot more room for experimentation. And so while poetry maybe originally was very rigid, what could be considered poetry. I think that now through the expressive and it's baby the postmodern movement we have, it's now really the opposite in that the most experimental forms are now maybe going to be falling underneath this more inclusive
Yeah.
umbrella of poetry. But for me personally, and I don't think I don't want to go there with it. I think that poetry, maybe even more so than traditional fiction, narrative fiction, short fiction, creative nonfiction essays, um, is going to make the reader much more. It's going to demand participation from the reader in a way that much fiction, instead, a lot of fiction is maybe, because it's so narrative, there can be sort of that not suspension of disbelief, but there's the sort of replacement of the self with the I of the work. And you forget that this is sort of a construct, and that it's a product, and that it's conveying meaning in a way that is not actually that obvious or black and white.
Do you think that since maybe when we were younger and we were taught, and it seems like it fell in kind of more strict constraints as far as the definition of poetry, and it's kind of evolved and moved into more of a free form, freestyle, and because when I ask people if they like poetry, most of them say no, not really. And I think a lot of it is just that they're not exposed to the many, faces of poetry and what it really stands for now. I think it's much more diverse. We have a diversity in poetry. And
I think that, in the past 20 years, there's been a resurgence in interest in poetry, particularly and thankfully because of the spoken word movement,
yeah.
and the kind of political potential that poetry can have. Um, but again, poetry is so broad, and I think that there's different kinds of poetry for every kind of audience.
Yeah.
And the people who say they don't like poetry are because they were exposed to a very limited sort of canonical definition of it, being presented to them maybe by a teacher who themselves were caught up in this sort of idea of like, poetry is going to be the Petrarchan sonnet. It's going to be written in an English that is not only not American English, but a dated, English from many generations ago. It's like reading a foreign language. The syntax is different, as opposed to being plugged into more contemporary poetry, that everyone is interested in. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a community builder, and I just think that if there's some sort of property, if it's not obviously like a strict sort of run of the mill, here's the narrative plot line, like here's the
Yeah.
narrative. If it doesn't follow that, then I'm like, well, then let's call it poetry. And while sometimes I just want it, I do want there to be this sort of, I think there is a distillation also that happens in poetry that we expect for poetry. That it's not fast food. It's something that requires chewing. It's something that you have to really,
And
it's
digestion,
diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole food, right? You have to chew on it. It's going to take a while to digest, but
Yeah.
it's going to be feeling really full for a long time and sustain you in ways that food with fillers just won't.
Yeah.
I love my fiction, my fellow fiction writers. I love you guys. I love you guys. You know that, right? But there's different kinds of fiction as well.
Yeah.
I
So
think that
what do you think, in your opinion, Michelle, that we can do as people who are passionate about poetry and wanting to spread our love for it and really to infuse it into our society? What do you think that we can do to help make that happen?
we can share poetry. We can share it. We can. I just reorganized my books a few weeks ago, and I realized that I was going to say I have a problem, but it's really just a habit of giving away some of my favorite books. Because, gosh, if I love it so much, I just want for someone else to love it that much as well. And I just
That's a great
I
thing,
pass on my books
actually.
to just keep passing it along. But I think also, like I said before, by really being truly inclusive and supporting each other at every stage and
Yeah.
every evolution of our careers, and our callings
Yeah.
to this field,
Yeah.
and realizing that again, my poetry is for me right now, for my people right now, and that's going to change. And there's no limit to how much great art humans are possible of creating. And why
Yeah.
not a world with more beautiful things?
Yeah. I think just like the different styles and genres of actual artwork and painting, so are kind of, the same thing exists within poetry, you know. And I think that when people once people see that, and then it has many, I mean, poetry, as you know, I think once you're a poet, you just realize that poetry exists everywhere. Just you see it
Yes.
you see poetry in everything, you know, and the beauty that it can bring out and so forth. So it's just this wonderful thing. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you agreed to come on here today, Michelle, and share your lovely poetry and words and enlighten us with all of your knowledge and wisdom. It's been a delight. Again, thank you, Todd Cirillo, for all that you do. But you know, it certainly has been a delight and a blessing to listen to you, to get to know you before, during, and I'm sure after. It's been just a delight to meet and get to know Michelle Nicholson. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette.
And love and blessings to everyone. And please continue to share this with other people. It'll be recorded and put onto YouTube, and we hope that you share it with others. But thank you so much, Michelle. You're a delight.
Thank you.
Love and blessings to everyone. Thank you so much. Bye bye.